What's up, guys? This is Joe14, and I am here with...
Mesonak from the TTV podcast.
Basically, this episode will be a special about mystery puzzle video games. I've gotten quite a few in the past few weeks, and I want to give my thoughts on some of the ones I've played through and make some recommendations, because this is one of my favorite types of games. I've never really been into first-person shooters because they get boring so quickly. I like games that have a good plot to them. Uh, basically, electronic novels is one of the ways you could describe most of these games. And I've been doing a ton of research and buying a bunch of them. And I want to give my thoughts on the value of these games, the quality, the storyline, and the actual ability to play within the game. If you're just basically reading through stuff, or if you're actually interacting, and whether or not it's hard or easy to do that.
All right.
So I don't actually have exactly a list, so we'll just go through them as I remember which ones I've done. First of all, of course, we've got Ace Attorney. We've discussed this a ton, so I'll be as brief as possible. Basically, the plot behind it is you play as a lawyer, and you go through several cases, the first being easier, and as you go through each game, the later cases get harder and harder. And there are two segments to the game. Each case, early on in the game, you do research and look around the crime scene, etc., to find information. You talk to people, learn information about the case, and then the second part is where you go into the actual courtroom and you try to, most of the time, prove what's the word for the person you're trying to defend?
Defendant?
The defendant.
Client?
Basically, yeah. You try to defend them, and generally, most often, you try to prove them innocent. Every now and then, they throw a curveball at you, and you find out later on that they're actually a criminal.
Yup.
Thankfully, that doesn't happen
when that happens.
Quite too often. Yeah. So that is basically that. For Ace Attorney, there are several games in the series. There's the original trilogy with the classic, Justice for All, and then Trials and Tribulations, and then we have a kind of weird one, Apollo Justice, that appears later on, that is a new character, and one of the main characters in the game, although not the one you're playing, is the previous main character for the first three games. And while it is a bit odd that they would change the main character, I actually like that one quite a bit. And then they have another one called Investigations. There's actually a sequel to this that is only available in Japan, but the difference between the original games and this one is that you actually try to prove people guilty instead of trying to prove them innocent. There's a little bit different setup. I don't think you ever actually go into the courtroom. Generally, you prove them guilty outside the courtroom, which is kind of weird to me. I never really understood why they don't try and prove them guilty in court.
Yeah, I guess it's because they're going around doing their own stuff, investigating. He's not even a prosecutor, he's just,
Basically, he's playing a detective.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird, because he's a prosecutor.
It should have been a gumshoe game with Edgeworth as the assistant.
Oh, that would have
Daring detective. Gumshoe.
Yeah. And then there's the most recent game, Dual Destinies, which we have talked about a bunch, where there are actually, now you play as three different not defendants. Attorneys.
And you still haven't beaten the game.
And I'm still on the third case, so I don't know if you actually ever get to play as the prosecutor, although I have seen pictures of Edgeworth in the game.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you actually do get to, but...
You do not.
That's basically that. You do?
You do not.
Okay. Dang it, spoiler. What the heck, Edgeworth's back, that's all I care about. I don't need to play as him to enter him. I am not aware of any additional games aside from, of course, the Professor Layton / Ace Attorney mix-up game, I guess you could call it.
Coming to the US 2014!
Yeah. Knowing our luck, it'll probably be December 2014.
Probably.
The 31st of December 2014.
That would be awful.
Or we find out it gets delayed. And with that, we can move into the second game, of course, Professor Layton, which I haven't played in quite a while. Basically, with that, there is an original trilogy. It's kind of set up like Star Wars, whereas the first 3 games are actually later on, and then the 4th, 5th, and 6th games are centered around the past. I have not actually finished the 5th game, and then the 6th game is only out in Japan, and that should also be coming out sometime in 2014. So that's cool news. I actually think the last time I played was like 3 or 4 months ago. I was playing through about halfway maybe through the 5th game, and then I kind of dropped it because got really into Ace Attorney and stuff.
Yeah.
But the first 3 games are for the DS. The 4th game is for the DS, and then the 5th and 6th games are for the 3DS. Basically, the plot behind that is you are this. Basically, I call it Sherlock Holmes. Professor Layton's basically like Sherlock Holmes, and then you have an assistant named Luke that is essentially Professor Watson as a little kid. And you go around solving puzzles in order to progress through the game, and it's got a sort of futuristic feel to it. Early on in the games, you start out in these places that are very old times London, and then somehow by the end of the game you've got these really modern robots and stuff. It's kind of funny how they throw in all this high-tech technology towards the end of, I think, pretty much every game. But it's kind of interesting to see the blend of those 2 things, and I quite liked it. I'm very interested to see the combination between Ace Attorney and Professor Layton, because they're very different, although the characters and the actual plot to it is very similar. So I could see the story being able to be combined, but the actual gameplay, it'll be interesting to see how they fit together.
Most definitely.
I don't know if you've actually seen videos of it. I saw a little...
It's actually funny. I saw the cinematic trailer, but I've not seen any gameplay bits.
I saw some gameplay from the actual Japanese version of the game. Some guy was translating it, but I didn't want to spoil it too much, so I only watched like the first little bit that's basically prologue stuff, and I could easily solve it, and it's not really huge spoilers to see the early part. But it looked to me like you start out as you're going to a scene where Gumshoe finds some person dead, I think, and then after that it switches over to Professor Layton, and then you try to solve some puzzles, and that's about as far as I got. So I didn't see any actual courtroom scenes, so I don't know if those are in there, but as far as I can see, definitely the puzzles from Professor Layton are in there.
Huh.
So then next up, we've got a few quirky games that are usually single games or only have 1 sequel. We have Hotel Dusk, which is an interesting game that I didn't actually finish, but I got quite far into. It's made by Sing, a company that actually went bankrupt before they could release it in the US. However, there's a UK version of it, which is essentially the same thing, except for it has a slightly different box, but of course the language in the UK is the same. So I'm thinking of having it shipped in from across seas, but recently the price has gone up a ton. They're like $30 now, and I had an opportunity to buy it for 20, and I decided against it for the time being, and I'm kind of bummed out that it's no longer available for that amount. But basically the first game is the DS is held sideways in sort of a book format, which I really like. Sing is fantastic about using the actual console. They do tons of really cool, interesting things. You hold the DS sideways, so it's like a book.
Really?
They use the microphone blowing thing a ton, and then it's just very interesting the way they have it set up. It acts like basically a novel, an electronic novel. The majority of the game is just talking to people and making decisions and stuff, and I prefer games like that. I don't like games where you're going around shooting, etc., because it's just not as interesting to me. However,
Joe,
you can.
what if there was a game with both?
Then that would be fantastic. Although I'd say it's kind of hard to combine the 2.
Yeah.
However, if someone managed to come up with that, I'd buy the game like 6 times, even though
There was a neat game called L.A. Noire you may have heard of.
I have heard of that. I've never played it.
It was about as close as I've seen.
we can talk about that if you want to towards the end.
Never played
But
it either.
uh,
Carry on.
okay, so basically, like I said, Hotel Dusk it acts like a novel. However, you do make a bunch of decisions, and there are points where you actually have to search around. It's a lot like Ace Attorney. However, the graphics are totally different. It's more of a 3D setup, and unfortunately, it's not the greatest 3D graphics I've seen. Mainly because I think it was released in 2004, 2005, back when 3D graphics weren't nearly as good. But it's not a huge hindrance. I don't tend to buy it for the graphics. Um, However, during the reading parts, it actually is a comic, basically a hand-drawn comic strip. And then during the searching parts, where you look for clues and stuff, it's 3D, and I dislike the 3D parts of it. And then there was a sequel released in the UK that I mentioned a little earlier that was called Last Window Secret of Cape West. I believe that's what it was called. And I don't actually know the premise behind that, although I'm pretty sure the main character is the same. I don't really know a whole lot about it. Um, and then next up, we have a game called Trace Memory. That's the one I was actually just playing. I got to the epilogue. I'm not really sure what happens after that, but I I'm kind of bummed out. One main thing that bugged me was the lack of length to the story. I got the game for about $12, I think, but back when it was originally released, it was $40, and that seems like a lot. I have played through almost the entire game in 2 days, so
Wow,
$40 for a game that plays in 2 days. Well, it is a good game. I don't think it's worth it. I would pay no more than $15 for it. And back when it came out, I never would have even considered buying it, no matter how good it was. But it reads the same way as Hotel Dusk. It's designed by the same company. I don't remember which came out first, but it also has a sequel. However, the sequel is only released in the UK for the Wii, which is a bit odd because it seems weird to have a sequel that isn't on the same console. Um, that just seems a bit strange to me. The first game is called Trace Memory. In the UK, it was called Another Code, Two Memories, and then in Japan, it was released as just simply Another, the word Another. And then
wow.
I actually don't remember what the sequel was called, but I don't know a whole lot about that. Uh, Basically, it plays the same way as Hotel Dusk. There's a lot more searching involved. Basically, the whole game is in a mansion. Early on, you're on a boat, and then you're on an island. And then on the island, there's this giant mansion that seems to have never ending secret passages. And after a while, it just becomes super normal to find, oh, hey, a secret passage behind the bookcase. There's like 17 of those.
Wow, stuff.
It's like, hey, a bookcase. I bet there's a hidden passage behind it. They've got fireplaces that move to the side, uh, uh, paintings on the wall that look way too big. Like when you see a painting, you don't actually see it go all the way to the floor and the ceiling. It's too obvious. But I mean, a few things in it are pretty obvious. The actual searching part of the game, it's pretty straightforward. You search for clues, you solve small puzzles. It's not like Professor Layton in that the puzzles are actually like not entirely brain work. You actually do physical things with the touchscreen, and I really like it because it uses the DS a ton. In the actual game, the main character, Ashley Richards, no, Robbins. Her dad's name is Richard. Her name is Ashley Robbins, and her father, supposedly dead, 11 years after he supposedly died, sends a package in the mail with a message and a DS. In the game, it's called a DTS. Basically, it's like this super complicated computer that is used to recover lost memories and implant new ones. So it's like Trace Memory, or it's like Hotel Dusk plus Inception.
Wow.
If you've seen the movie Inception,
Mm-hmm.
it contains a lot of things that are along the same lines, although not nearly as detailed, and there are no bazookas. But uh, in the game there are these cards. They're called DTS cards. They look like game DS cards that you put into the console. You can take pictures and everything. Although I don't believe there's actually a camera on the original DS. But
you
can take pictures of the screen, and they use the microphone. One really cool thing, although it's probably not that big of a deal to spoil for you. You'd figure it out in like 2 or 3 minutes. But there's one point where you actually have to take the DS and close it in order to stamp something.
Well then.
You close it and it stamps the image, and then there's another part where you have to reflect the two screens together, which was kind of difficult for me because I was playing it on my 3DS, and the gap between the two screens is a lot smaller than it was on the original DS, and it was designed for the DS Classic.
Yeah.
So when I folded it, I had to really try hard because the image wasn't coming out quite right. I couldn't get it to line up quite right because the gap is a lot smaller. But you basically reflect one of the screens onto the other, and it creates a picture on the bottom screen, which is really cool.
That is pretty interesting.
I like the use of all these different things on the DS. It really takes advantage of all the abilities the DS has. There are some games, like, for example, Pokemon. The whole game, you hit the A and B button. It could have easily, all the new Pokemon games easily could have been done on the Game Boy. It's no different. There's no real use of the new things on the DS. They just create a new game. The only new difference is that it has slightly better graphics. It doesn't actually take advantage of all the different things, and I like it when companies take advantage of the difference, the newer things that you could put on consoles. And I bet if they had survived long enough, they could have created a bunch of cool new stuff with 3DS, but unfortunately, like I said, they went bankrupt.
Yeah.
And this is the same company that made Hotel Dusk.
Ah. Well then.
And then we've got a few more games. One is Time Hollow that I found out literally like a week ago and bought it, and then it's another one of those games that was like $25 or $30, and I finished it in 2 days again. So it's a lot shorter than I had hoped, and unfortunately, it doesn't look like they'll be making a sequel, although they hinted at it towards the end of the game, but it didn't sell well enough. It was made in 2008, so I've basically given up hope of seeing a sequel, although I would like to very much. The premise behind it is that you are a 17-year-old kid that is living a normal life, or semi-normal life, and one day the kid's parents just vanish out of thin air, and he starts talking to people, and they all say his parents have been gone for like 12 years, and yet he had just spoken to them the previous day. He finds this weird pen lying on his bed, and he finds out that this pen can draw portals into time, backwards and forwards, and change events that happen. And this is the whole concept behind the game is centered around this, and it's a very interesting thing because there is another character. I will not reveal who it is because it would be a spoiler. However, it's quite obvious towards early on in the game that there's another character somewhere that has a pen as well, because they are changing events in his past, and they were the person who changed the events in his past with his parents just disappearing out of nowhere. And he has to go backwards and forwards in time in order to change events because his friends and a bunch of people he knows suddenly end up disappearing, and large parts of his past are changed, and he's to the point where he's not sure quite what's real and what isn't, because he's the only person that has the ability to retain things that have happened. Like, for example, he knew his parents were still had been there the previous day, but nobody else remembered. So when you use the pen, you remember what happens. However, he has a lot of trouble remembering what's real and what isn't because everything keeps changing. And basically, that's the premise behind it.
That actually sounds very interesting.
It was a fantastic game. There are only a few things that I could have asked for. One is the dialogue was a little bit weird. Some of the characters acted unrealistic. For example, later on, he reveals to one of his friends that are still alive that he has this pen, and this friend almost immediately believes him. Now, if I had a friend that came up to me and said they had a pen that could draw portals through dimensions, it would take a lot to get me to believe this. Also, he's the only person who can see the pen, so he held his finger. And his friend just totally buys into it. And then soon after, this friend vanishes from time or is killed mysteriously several years before. And It's very interesting because as you go on, you have to draw portals into time and change events that happen and save people who have died. Um, and some people just randomly appear in time and they're somehow involved in this, and it's quite interesting.
Yeah,
I
that
liked it very
that
much.
sounds great.
The only thing that bums me out is some of the dialogue. It just doesn't quite make sense. And another thing is it's super short. It took me probably 6 to 8 hours to play through the entire game. Although I think there might possibly be multiple endings because there are certain things that you can make choices about. Another thing is while you're using the pen, you only have a certain number of uses. And basically how it works is there are chapters to the game. In the first chapter, you start with 10 uses of the pen. After every use, you can refill it by finding these orbs that are lying around. Um, and if you don't refill it by the time of the next chapter, your max number is reduced to that. So say you used the portal twice and you're dropped down to 8. Now, if you don't refill those 2 before the end of the chapter, you'll be reduced to your max number being used to 8. So by the end of the game, if you are really not refilling it quite often, you'll be down to 1 or 2 by the end of the game, and it gets harder and harder if you don't search for those refill items. So there's an idea like that allows you to sort of lose. If you use up all of them up, you magically disappear from time, and you have to start over at the beginning of each chapter.
Well then.
So that's quite an interesting game. The end is quite a cliffhanger. Someone who was thought to be dead ended up not being dead, and I'm really hoping for a sequel. Although the game, surprisingly enough, did not sell well. The release date was quite odd for the U.S. It's sold in Japan, I think, in May of 2008. And then in the UK it was released later in that month, and then it didn't get released until September or October in the US. And so a lot of people who wanted to get it ended up not getting it because it came out so late, and they'd given up hope of it actually coming to the US or forgot about it. But it didn't sell quite as well, and it looks like there probably won't be a sequel, which really bums me out because it was a great game.
Well darn.
You should really get it. It's a fantastic.
That game sounds very interesting to me.
And then there are a few more. Another one that I got was 999. I haven't actually played it. However, I did do a ton of research and actually watched a little bit of it. You start out as a character inside a boat. You're part of this giant game where there are 9 people. Each of you have a watch on your wrist that have a number on it. And you have to solve puzzles, and you're actually limited to 9 hours in the game. And if you don't solve it by then, your watch actually is connected to an explosive and will kill you. And if you don't solve it by the end of that, you are killed. And if you try and do other things in the game that are incorrect, if you solve a certain puzzle incorrectly, you could also be killed. If you don't solve it in 9 hours, it automatically puts you back at the beginning of the game. However, if you do something wrong, like solve a puzzle wrong, it won't send you back quite that far. It'll send you back like 1 chapter. And then there are the other characters that have watches in the game, and some of them betray you. What's really interesting is the character development is very all over the place. If you make a certain decision, certain characters will betray you, and if you make another decision, other characters will betray you. So the characters themselves don't have a specific personality. They may or may not betray you based off your decisions. They're not like one of them isn't bad no matter what. They'll actually adapt based off your decisions, which is really interesting. There are 30 different endings, and then there's a sequel called Virtue's Last Reward for the 3DS that is basically the same concept. You're also in this game, and there are 6 different endings. It's a lot bigger than the first one, but that's another one I would recommend. Even though I haven't played it, it is rated as one of the top games that you can buy for mystery puzzle games. I haven't played it yet though, but I did a ton of research on it. And then there's one more. It's called Jake Hunter. It was only released, most of them, it's actually a series of 20 games. that were only released in Japan. However, they got 1 or 2 of them to the U.S., and I'm thinking of getting it. I don't know the premise behind it, but I've heard it's very well liked. And I think that's about it. But basically, my ratings for our Ace Attorney is probably my favorite of all of these. It's a great buy. You can buy each of them for under $20, I think, aside from Dual Destinies, because it's more recent. It can only be purchased for like 30. Is it 30 or 35?
It's
I've
30.
forgotten. Okay, but all the other ones you can buy as actual DS cards. Unfortunately, Dual Destinies is only on the eShop, so it's a set price unless they ever decide to drop it, which is probably not likely.
Correct.
But my second favorite would probably be Time Hollow. Unfortunately, it's kind of a short game, so I actually bought it for $16. I would say I think that's a little bit much considering it only took me 2 days to play through. Maybe they'll take a little longer for other people, but that's another probably my second favorite. And then Professor Layton is probably my third. And then Hotel Dusk and Trace Memory, while they are good, they're also quite short, at least Trace Memory, as I haven't finished Hotel Dusk yet. But what are your thoughts, Meso, on each of these games? If you want to do a little bit of research, maybe just look up some pictures of each of them, and what are your thoughts on them? Of course, you can tell us a lot about Ace Attorney, but how about some of the other ones?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. Ace Attorney is pretty short. It's the only one I've played, so obviously I have a bit more stake in it than others. However, I guess I'll start with Professor Layton. That, out of all these, grips my interest the most for the moment, solely because I've heard you talk about it in the past. It seems very interesting to me, and it seems like it has quite a lot of entries in the series, and then with the crossover next year, I feel I kind of owe it to myself to play those games ASAP. So that is on my agenda as far as priority is concerned. Out of all these, I'm going to do Layton. But after hearing you talk about Time Hollow, that game sounds interesting to me quite a lot, and I just looked at some pictures and the art style is cool. It seems quite interesting, and as far as the possibility of a sequel, I saw it came out in 2008, so I'd say that's pretty impossible at this point if what you say is true about its sales. And what, did you say it has a cliffhanger ending, or just plot twist ending?
An extreme cliffhanger. Like one of the characters that you would try to save throughout the entire game ends up surviving, even though they actually died and then they randomly appear out of nowhere.
So they were probably going to make a sequel, and then
they were
they
probably
didn't.
playing it because it says to be continued at the end of the game, and then of course you can't continue playing.
Yeah.
Which really stinks if they don't end up making a sequel, because I was really hoping for one.
And then what was it called? Hotel Dusk and all that. You've told me about those before.
Yes.
And those sound interesting to me as well, that game. And what was it? Did it have a sequel, you said?
Yeah, in the UK and Japan.
Oh.
So it's kind of hard to get your hands on. It's called Last Window Secret of Cape West.
Alrighty. Well, that one also seems interesting to me.
And then Trace Memory, which is also made by the same company that I was just playing through now. And well, it is a fantastic game, and I recommend it if you can find it for a reasonable price. And it's also very quick to play through. If you were to get it, it will only take you less than 6 hours to play through, unless the epilogue's insanely long, because I haven't done the epilogue yet, but I'm guessing probably not.
Yeah. As far as 999 is concerned, I just read, is the title really 999? 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors?
Yep.
What the heck?
I refer to it as 999.
Yeah, it's a lot less cumbersome. I'm looking up details about this game, because... Yeah. Okay. Interesting art style. When was it released? 2009, 2010, yeah.
And then the sequel was released not too long ago, and the sequel looks a lot better.
Oh, wow.
And that's for the 3DS. However, I've heard some things that saving is a little bit odd on it. It was originally designed for the PSP, but or PS Vita. It was designed for the PS Vita, and then it was converted to a DS format because the original was for the DS, and so many people were into it that they wanted to get it for the 3DS because not everyone wants to go buy a PS Vita just to play this one game.
Yeah.
And the conversion didn't go quite so well, so some of the saving doesn't work. If you save during certain stages of the game, it'll corrupt your data file. However, you can't copy, so if you know around the time when it's supposed to be corrupted, then you can copy it over or just not save during that time. But that seems a bit of a pain to do, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I'm looking at the sequel, Zero Escape Virtues Last Reward, and they say there's gonna be a third game.
Apparently, yeah.
But it's gonna take place between the prior two, because that's what should not actually happen in the third game in a trilogy. That seems kind of dumb. IMO.
I'm not sure if I'll go and buy the second game, mainly because the conversion didn't seem like it went so well. And I don't know anything about the third game. I don't even know when it's coming out. I wasn't paying attention a ton because the second game kind of turned me off with the whole problematic
In
thing.
2013, he said in his Twitter account he'd like to bring some news regarding Zero Escape 3 before the end of the year, but there were some obstacles that had to be overcome first. That's all we know. Well, I swear, as if I needed any more stuff on my gaming backlog to get around to. It was bad enough with Layton and everything else, but all these sound pretty interesting in their own right. I may have to try these at some point because puzzle games like this seem interesting to me.
If you get a chance, the big ones I'd say is Time Hollow, mainly because it's very entertaining, it's very thought-provoking, and it only takes a day or two to play through, so it's not like it'll take you a really long time. Some other games like Professor Layton, that would take you weeks to get through all the games, but Time Hollow doesn't take that long, and it's totally worth setting aside a couple of days during your winter break to play through it.
Yeah.
It is also becoming harder and harder to find, so I didn't find mine for like quite a while. I got mine for $17 and it didn't even come with a case. The ones that come with cases are like $30 or $40, so.
Ouch.
The cheapest one I could find was the $17 one without the case in it. Yeah, so I'd say get your hands on it soon before it starts going up, but it's totally worth it, although the amount of time could be looked at as a positive if you don't have a whole lot of time to be playing games.
Okay, well, I shall be sure to do that.
Pretty much wraps it up unless you have any other games that you want to throw in that I haven't heard about.
None that I really want to throw in, but I would like to say that if I do get around to playing any of these, I'll probably give my opinions on another episode and whatnot. That's pretty much it. I have no other recommendations. Probably because I don't play many puzzle games.
You play Ace Attorney, though.
Only that.
It's basically a puzzle game. I say more mystery games.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. But with that wraps up our special video game mystery puzzle game episode. I'm still not sure exactly what I'm going to call this because that seems too cumbersome to say.
Maybe Jo will be back next week.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, I am Joe14 and I was here with
Mesonak from the TTV podcast.
And you all have a wonderful Friday.
Yelp. Happy Friday, everyone.
Yeah.
See.
Bye.